All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Reverend Kathy Pittenger. I'm the Children's Initiatives Coordinator for the Michigan Conference. And myself and Reverend Christy Miller-White are so excited to have you here as part of this part one of Reimagining Faith Formation webinar. Christy and I have been talking about how do we make this work, and we originally had a planning your ministry year scheduled for July, and we've had to pivot, just like everyone, around what are we doing and how are we thinking about faith formation, especially as we think about the fall. So we're excited to have you here with us. Just a few reminders as we get started. Please do keep your microphone muted. We are expecting quite a number of folks to join us, and it just helps to keep the background noise down. And feel free to mute your video if that's helpful for you too. Screen fatigue is real, and seeing ourselves, sometimes we just need a break. So it's okay to mute your video. And we are recording this webinar, so you can come back and watch it again, or you can encourage someone who wasn't able to be here today to watch it. Please type your questions in the chat box, which you can find generally at the top or the bottom of your screen. If you hover, there's a little chat box. You can type your questions in there, and we'll respond throughout the webinar. We also have some time at the end specifically for questions and answers. I am so excited to introduce our presenter for today, Reverend Christine Hides. She is the Director of Christian Education at Kenilworth Union Church, the mom of 2 teenage daughters, and the author of the website Bless Each One. She is a commissioned deacon in the United Methodist Church and is called to lead ministries of faith formation that nurture imagination and participation in God's vision of peace and justice. And Christine is one of my friends who we've been able to get to know each other better because of COVID-19 and this pandemic. And I am so excited to have her here to present to us. And Christine, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Kathy, and thank you to the Michigan Annual Conference for hosting this event today. I am excited to be with you all online, but am noticing that we had originally planned this to be in person, and I was looking forward to a little trip to Michigan. I am from Northern Illinois, so it would have been just a little bit of a drive, but I'm glad that we can do this way. As we begin, as you're coming in, please go ahead and type in your name and location. It's really fun to see where people are from. I know we have people from many denominations and many parts of the country, and even maybe an international visitor or two joining us today. And it might be really helpful if you have some paper, or if you're an online person, some way to take a couple notes. I've got a couple points here where you're able to, throughout the presentation, where you're able to just write a few things down and brainstorm a little bit, because I know we're all hungry for those times to process. I also invite you to bring something tangible into your line of vision. One of the things that we have been reading a lot about is Zoom fatigue. And I think this isn't a cure, but I do think that having something that has a spiritual connection for you, something tangible. I invite children and families to light a candle with me when we do online things, because that candle just reminds us that online space can be sacred, though it does not have the same feel. These stones are something that I have used to work with children in the past few months, and they have really enjoyed them, and I as an adult enjoy them too. So they're holy listening stones. Leanne Hadley had created them, and you can go to her website and learn more about them. But as we center ourselves in something tangible, let's also center ourselves in how we're feeling. So I invite you to look at these stones and perhaps think of one that reminds you of today and what today is like for you, what you're feeling, what you're noticing. It's just kind of a way to center ourselves. These are strange and unfamiliar times, and we've been adapting and shifting for months. And we've, I think all of the faith formation leaders that I know have been doing this with a ton of creativity and grace. And so today, I want today to be an opportunity to acknowledge all of the hard work and creativity that has gone into the last few months, and then have an eye toward moving forward, even in the midst of uncertainty. So thank you for being here. Um, Thank you for taking a breath with me and centering ourselves. So today's plan is grounded in the parable of the house on the rock. Which I noticed, I love the Bible because when you open it, you always notice something new and interesting when you are reading even a familiar story. And I think many of us know the parable of the house on the rock. But what stood out to me today, or the other day when I was reading and preparing, was that this parable is subtitled in the NRSV in some places as hearers and doers. And so let us hear what God is saying to us today. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on a rock. And so our goal today is to be both hearers of what is going on in both our lives and the lives of our families and the context that we work in, and then to do the doing part of creating a plan for fall, or preparing to do that. So let us open in prayer. Pray with me. God, we are a little exhausted, and at times we feel that we might be failing or struggling in ministry. It doesn't feel like we have enough time for all that we need to do for family. Money is very tight for many of us, and we are worried about people that we love and care for. God, we notice that many things are out of our control, and this is very difficult right now. So God, please remind us as we gather that whatever we are feeling today is normal, and remind us that by your grace, there is a way through this pandemic. Help us to pay attention to one thing at a time and to let go of perfection. Give us curiosity, give us trusted colleagues, give us strength, patience, and hope as we plan for the year ahead. In the name of Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen. So as we focus on hearing and doing, it seemed an architecture metaphor seemed to arise. So we're going to be thinking about building ministry and the metaphor of buildings. So if we were building a building, we would first survey the landscape. That's where we'll start today. Then we would need a blueprint, and then we would start the process of building. And we hope to have plenty of time today for Q&A. That's a lot of ampersands I added in there. I didn't notice that. So surveying the landscape for me is really the listening and hearing part, paying attention to what is going on in our world and being curious about all that we are experiencing. So I have a little story I want to share with you. I have a daughter who is 19. She just finished her freshman year. She is an architecture major at an out-of-state school. And in March, she had a ticket to come home for spring break, and it left at 6 a.m. in the morning. The night before at 5 p.m., the school made the decision to close campus for the remainder of the year. She had less than 12 hours to pack up her dorm room, though she could have left it and made arrangements to get it later. We live out of state, so she had 12 hours to pack everything up, find a friend who was gracious enough to take it, and left campus quickly without a lot of ceremony or goodbye. And I think her story is not unusual. Many of our college kids and high school, all of the kids have experienced a lot of transition. What's been curious to me is to have the opportunity to see how you work toward an architecture degree online. And the school that she goes to, their motto is learning by doing. And so I never would have had the opportunity to see this because she's out of state. And so I watched as this project unfolded throughout the quarter. So the first thing that she was asked to do was to pay attention to the space between her body and an object. She happened to choose her arm in the stairway. And so this is a picture of the prototype of what she was designing. And she was paying attention to lots of small details about the shape of both the banister and her arm, and also the shape of the structure itself. What this turned into was this beautiful digital rendering of a sculpture, and there's actually you could actually, through CAD, computer aided design, she can give you a tour where you actually simulate walking through this sculpture. And so I share this with you to think about how, if we're going to build something beautiful and strong, we need to be paying attention to some of the small details. So maybe I'm stretching the metaphor a little bit. Also, a little chance to brag about my daughter, but but I think that paying attention piece is really important. And so I have two tools that I've been using to pay attention to what the children and families in my ministry are experiencing. So I'm going to invite you right now to, I know you all started by putting something in the chat. If you have a piece of paper or a way to take notes online, if you want to fold your paper in half or divide your screen, I would like you to take 1 minute to write down everything you've noticed and can think of that everything you've noticed recently about ministry. And so I'll give you a minute to do that, but I want you to approach this with curiosity. We don't have to judge whether this is a good thing or bad thing or a mix of both, but just be curious. What are you noticing right now? And I'll give you just 60 seconds to write down what you can. Kathy, was that about 60 seconds? I think so. I didn't actually look at my watch. So you can do this exercise individually or as a team. We have 3 people that serve on our children and family ministry staff. So we did this together back in May. And many of the things that you all put in the chat that you were noticing about families being zoomed out, there being tiredness, we're noticing we're not quite sure how to engage people and how to reach people in this new way. It's a challenge. We noticed those things too. After we wrote them down, we each circled 1 or 2 that seemed to be really important. And then we also then began to sort of sort them out. You may be familiar with the SWOT analysis, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I know some people use other language besides opportunities and threats. But what when you take the time to just write down what you notice, what emerges there are some things that are strengths in our ministry, and there are some things that are opportunities. One of the challenges that we've had is reaching everybody online. But I will tell you that we have had, in my ministry, we've had a couple children who were, they were fairly regular attenders, but not every week. And one of them in particular was pretty introverted. And COVID-19 and meeting online has given me the opportunity to get to know this introverted child who hid behind their parents' legs when they arrived at church in person. But online, they talk to me all the time. So we've actually developed this relationship, and I see this child every week, multiple times at our story time or our Sunday mornings. And it's just been a really great opportunity. I think later on, we'll talk about some other opportunities that are sort of system-wide that we have to think about faith formation. But there are things that are challenges. Virtual ministry is not the same as in-person ministry, and I don't want to gloss over that challenge. But I think giving ourselves the time and space to really think about what we notice and categorizing it is one way to pay attention as we begin to plan. A second method for, I did write some of these down, sorry. So these are some of the things that just a handful of the things we've noticed in our ministry. We felt like we handled the original pivot, but now kids are zoomed out. People, even though we're not seeing them, we know that they are seeking connection and that they have a different appreciation for church as an in-person community than they may have had a few months ago. I know I'm guilty of this. I just took it for granted that I would see people on a pretty regular basis. And so we have a new appreciation for that, which might be an opportunity. So it's just a handful. And Kathy, you're going to make these slides available if I send you a PDF. So many of these slides have links in them, so they'll be available to you after the webinar as well. So you can take a look at that more. So the second tool that I have leaned on a little bit for paying attention to what is happening is called empathy maps. And I think people in the business world or may be familiar with this. It's a way of designing a product, and I know ministry is not a product, and I'm really careful about that, but designing something that people can use by paying attention to what it is that they need. So empathy mapping is just thinking about your families in your ministry right now. What are they feeling? We named exhaustion, for example. What are they thinking? What are they saying? And what are they doing? So you can, there's many conversations you can have, or surveys, or even just collecting the emails that people are sending to you is a way to get at what the people in your ministry are really feeling. You can also segment the population. You might pay particular attention, not everybody's the same. So you might think about, well, families that have younger children or older adults, or so you might think about it by age, and those different groups may have different things that they're thinking, feeling, saying, and doing. You can also think about, I have a little chart that we've been thinking about, who are we seeing both online and in person very frequently? Who are we seeing more online that we didn't see in person as much? Kids who are involved in sports fall into this category, for example. They might have been on a travel team, and now all of a sudden we see them online. So we never saw them in person, or very rarely, but we see them online. And then you have an opposite group where they are online, but we maybe never saw them, or sorry, the other way. We don't see them online, but they were very regular attenders in person. So that's another way to look at it. I don't know that there's one right way or wrong way. I think the most important piece is just to really listen to the people in your congregation and what is happening and what's going on in their lives right now. So I would love for you to think about an opportunity that you have identified in ministry and type that into the chat. It would be fun to see that. And then Kathy, before we begin the next section, are there any questions that we should address now, or are the questions more for later?
I think that we'll continue on and look at questions later.
Okay. Sounds great. And before I end this section on paying attention, I would encourage you to pay attention to you too, and what it is that you are feeling and thinking right now. This is really hard work. Be curious and be vulnerable, but also, recognize it might be a time to let go of some things. And I imagine that you have not heard it enough. Thank you for all the hard work and the big shifts that you have made over the last few months as you cared for the children and families and adults in your ministry. I hope that you're hearing that, but let me just say that you are valuable and your ministry is valuable, which is why I encourage you to take care of yourself so that you can do this work that God has called you to for the long haul. So there's a few links here. One of my favorite things that has helped me is a podcast called Checking In. It's by Susan David. She's a Harvard psychologist. The podcast is only 15 minutes long, usually, and she just talks about emotional resilience and feelings in this time of COVID-19. So I wanted to share that with you and just continue to be grateful for your work and encourage you in your ministry. So the second piece of the second step in planning is to think about your blueprint. And we used to know how to plan ministry, right? For many of us, it looked like school. We got a calendar, we got lesson plans, we had rooms and teachers, and we did all of those things. And this time of the year for me was a lot of filling in boxes. Okay, on this date, we'll do this thing and this person will do it. And things are now looking much different than they did before. So sometime in late April or May, an image of a teeter-totter came to my mind as a way to think about the shape of our plan. In the parable of the house on the rock, they're building a house. I think we're building teeter-totters. And a teeter-totter is a really simple, timeless toy, but a teeter-totter has a fulcrum, the thing that holds the board up, in a really simple explanation. And that fulcrum, that thing that is holding the entire thing up, I imagine as our why. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. And then on either side of the teeter-totter, you have gathered or in-person ministry on one side, and you have online ministry in the other. And then you have this platform that connects the two. It may not be a perfect metaphor, but it is one that has helped me to think about this. How do we build a teeter-totter that can pivot back and forth? Because what we know now that we didn't know in March is that we are reopening in phases, and we may go back and forth in phases for some time to come. I pray that's not what is happening, but I think it's wise to think that it is a possibility. So Kathy and I, along with another colleague, Tanya, have been creating some resources for faith formation leaders like you. And the first one we created is about naming your why. So if you would just do a quick, so your why can be thought of as your purpose, maybe your mission. Use the reaction button. If you have named your why for your ministry, can you give a thumbs up? I would love to see, how many. Okay. All right. Great. I can't see everybody's face all at once on my screen, but I see quite a few, maybe about half of us. So you're in good company if you have or have not created your why. So when I first heard about this idea of the why, I immediately thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to convene a task force, and it's going to meet for 6 months, and we're going to wordsmith this thing to death. And that is not what any of us need right now. I think we all need a quick way to identify our core purpose. And so Kathy, Tanya, and I have been working on that. And so there's a website here, faithformationplaylist.com, but on that website, you will find templates for quickly naming your why and grounding it theologically. The one I created, you can see it's a little bent. It actually, in probably under an hour of brainstorming by yourself or with a small team, you can get a first draft down. And then I playfully created it into an airplane shape with the idea that you could, send it to your team or a colleague for some feedback. So, and launch your ministry. So that's one way to name your why. On this website, there are some other resources to help you think about that. But your why is, and I realize I'm going to say pivotal, and I'm talking about a teeter-totter. I didn't mean to be so punny, but your why really grounds your ministry. And from a practical perspective, it helps you to stay motivated when things are hard. If you know, like, this is what I'm called to do, this is what I'm doing, it can help you to stay motivated. It can help you to focus on what's really important. Even I went to my office the other day and I found just a ton of catalogs. And I'm like, I'm not buying any stuff right now. Nobody's here. So because I because I know my why, I'm like, okay, just recycle the catalogs right now. I don't need to focus on that. Or maybe you're getting emails about this curriculum or that curriculum. It can help you that way. And I know Kathy has given the example of, churches in Michigan that the churches that knew their VBS why were able to think very clearly about whether or not this was the summer to have VBS based on what your purpose was for hosting that VBS. So I encourage you to spend some time thinking about your why as you do that. And and let me go back to say about the why. For all of us in faith formation ministry, different denominations, different churches say it differently, but all of us really, our call is to nurture disciples or some form of discipleship, right? Like that is our mission and our purpose. So the why doesn't have to be too long or lengthy. It is just a way to stay grounded in what the work that God has called us to, which is essentially the work of discipleship. So how do we do that? And how do we do that in a COVID-19 world? So as I mentioned, on either side of the teeter-totter, you have online ministry and you have in-person ministry. Could you do a thumbs up reaction? I'm wondering if people are familiar with Ron Heifetz's work in the book Adaptive Leadership. Does that sound familiar? Adaptive or technical challenges? I see a couple thumbs. All right, so Adaptive Leadership is a really great resource. It's written like a textbook, so if you go out and buy it, just be aware it is, but you can probably find really good summaries online. What's important to me about his book right now is that he names the difference between a technical challenge and an adaptive challenge. So as we think about fall, it is helpful to think about what things are technical and what things are adaptive. And what do I mean by that? So a technical challenge is one that you can solve with existing knowledge and using like expertise in the field. So even though we didn't a month ago maybe know what our room capacities were and how many people were going to be allowed in the building at any certain time or any certain phase, we now, most states and many denominations and annual conferences have now put out those guidelines. So if we are going to gather in person, and if we are able to do that safely, there are a set of guidelines that we need to follow, many of which were created and are beyond our control. Like we follow the state guidelines, we follow our denominational guidelines. So it's really a technical challenge. If I want to gather a group, what's the size I can gather, and what is the space I have that will accommodate all the guidelines that I need to do that safely. So if you're in Michigan, just want a little shout out to Kathy. Kathy Pittenger can help you, with reopening guidelines and those technical kinds of challenges thing. Online ministry now, or hybrid ministry, where you're partially online and partially in person, that's an adaptive challenge. Though we as leaders have maybe heard for a little while that we should have an online presence, and maybe we have a website or Facebook page or Facebook group, we know that we could be doing more to reach families 24/7 using our online ministry. But we also know that families are zoomed out. And so how are we going to face this new challenge? And it's one that will involve different shifts, different ways of thinking about things. It will mean sort of reorienting both our leadership, our churches, and maybe even the families and individuals that we serve. So I've linked to a little bit more about adaptive leadership for faith formation leaders, but I thought that might be helpful to share the difference between adaptive challenges and technical challenges as we think about the shape of what it is that we are planning. And I will pause here just for a second. Kathy, are there any questions that would be good to address here, or?
We haven't had any questions. We did have a couple of checking in around opportunities for ministry and connecting more with parents during this time, which has been helpful, since sometimes those connections can be difficult when we're rushing back and forth at church. And also, Laura shared that the Godly Play stories that they're doing are reaching more families online than they had in person each Sunday. So those are just a couple of neat things to think about as opportunities and blessings that are happening from so far. And if anyone has questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat box. Thanks, Christine.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you for sharing those opportunities that are coming about. I think those opportunities really are places that we can think about how we're going to meet these adaptive challenges, the shifts that we've made. And in the spirit of a teeter-totter, I want to thank Tanya for putting this together. Teeter-totters were designed to be played with. So they're a toy. And for me, the image of a teeter-totter works also because I think about the Holy Spirit being involved in the shifts and the pivots and the movement that we are making right now. And while it doesn't always feel playful, sometimes it feels anxious and like hard work. I hope that we can, as much as possible, maintain that spirit of curiosity about what new things God is doing in our midst and what new things are possible. And if we can play a little bit, like we try something, we don't have to commit forever, but like, let's try it, see how it works. That's a way to sort of test out adaptive challenges, just to play a little bit and see what works and maybe what doesn't, especially as we are in unprecedented times where many things have changed. So I'm guessing this is what a lot of people are here for today, is sort of thinking about the doing. How is it that we plan? And I'm going to be really honest with you. On Friday, I thought that I had our plan nailed down. And then over the weekend, I started to second guess myself. And it's still a long way to September, which is the start of our program year. So, you know, I'm holding everything loosely, but really trying to nail down the big picture things that we can nail down now. And so I'm going to share with you a little bit about what I've learned. I don't think that I don't think that, and I'm pretty certain that there is not a one-size-fits-all way to move forward in fall, given that we are from many different places and many different contexts and many different states. But I do think that there are some processes that are helpful. So as I mentioned, this would have been what I was doing this summer. This is pre-COVID planning. Start with your yearly calendar, you mark off Christmas and Easter and Lent and Advent, and then you get your class rosters together, and then you recruit your teachers, and then you do your curriculum, and you plug it all into your lesson planning calendar, and you're good to go. And I know we have churches of varying sizes, and so for some of us that looks different than others, but this was essentially the process. Am I seeing some head nodding? Is this familiar? Yes. And I think those tools are still useful, but I think that as we face an adaptive challenge, another tool that we can bring into play is to think about design thinking. So if you Google design thinking, this is an approach that many businesses are using, and also ministry as well. If you're familiar with Kenda Creasy-Dean, who wrote Almost Christian, she's been talking a lot about this in the past couple years, about how we design adaptive, flexible ministry that meets the needs of people today. And it begins by listening and paying attention, which we talked about, naming your why, then identifying your in-person gathering guidelines, that's your technical challenge. And then for the adaptive challenges, the online or hybrid ministry, designing based on your assumptions and then testing those assumptions with small experiments. So in my ministry, these are some of the assumptions that we have named, and I think that many of these I've seen in the chats, right? Where people are cautious, people are zoomed out, and at the same time, people are seeking church community and seeking God in new ways in an uncertain time. Children especially need some sense of normalcy. Working parents, have such compassion for working parents right now. This is especially hard for them. We know now some things that we didn't know before, like this is a phased reopening and we may go forward and backward. We also know that mass gatherings are sort of off the table for a while, and singing is dangerous. So all these things that you've been reading about online. So these are the assumptions. They may not all be proven, but these are the assumptions that we need to test as we think about what we're going to do for fall. And we can think about questions too, right? Like, so we can assume that it's going to be challenging to engage families online. But we also might think about it as, well, families are hesitant, but they might do it under a certain set of circumstances. What are those certain set of circumstances? They might attend a story time online that is 15 minutes long, but they may not attend an hour-long worship service that's on screen only. I mean, that's just, I'm not saying that's necessarily true, but those are the kinds of things that you can start to play with when you think about your assumptions, that there may be certain circumstances that people are able to participate in and not others. And many of the reasons for their participation or lack of participation, some of those things are beyond your control and beyond my control. But what we can control, we can test with some shifts. So I don't know, give me a thumbs up or nod your head if you can, if you have started to name some of the assumptions that you're making about fall. Maybe some of you have looked at the local school guidelines to think about assumptions about what might be possible in the fall in terms of meeting. Thank you. Yeah, I'm getting some thumbs up. All right. So, and waves, yay. Like I said, I can't see everybody all at once, but that's helpful. Thank you. All right. So once you've identified some possible assumptions, which may or may not be similar to this list, depending on your context, it's helpful to think about what shifts your ministry might make in order to operate under a new set of assumptions. So again, here are some that we are considering in my context. So we have been a very age-graded Sunday school, and we are looking at how to do ministry with families together as we approach fall. And there's several reasons for that. There are practical ones, like if we have to wear masks and follow safety guidelines, we assume that many of our teachers do not want to, our volunteer teachers do not want to be responsible for, enforcing is a strong word, but, making sure that children wear masks, right? I'm assuming, I don't particularly want to do that, and I'm assuming that my teachers may not as well. So by putting families together, the practical side is that families can be responsible for their kind of own safety and following the guidelines that are in place at the church. But the other piece is, and this is where I really think that there are some opportunities in COVID-19, is that we have known since the 1970s at least, and John Westerhoff's work, that the school-based model of faith formation is not the most effective one. And we've known that, and we've tried some things, but it's been really hard to move congregations into a new way of thinking. And right now, our whole entire society is in the middle of a massive shift in thinking. So perhaps this is the way to think about families together, because we know from research that this is the way that people grow in faith, is that family is primary and that relationships are key. So that's a shift that you may or may not consider depending on your context. We are also, this kind of gets at the school thing too, we're also thinking about moving toward spiritual practices rather than focusing on instruction. That families are looking for ways to pray together in times of uncertainty and anxiety. They are looking for ways that they can serve their community. And so maybe for a while, we're going to focus a little less on, Bible stories. Not that they're not important, I'm not saying that, but that the faith that we live and practice every day is an important part of discipleship, and that this might be an opportunity to focus on how we're living daily in our lives. Other shifts, so next week, I'm going to plug this several times. You have the opportunity to participate in the Hybrid Faith Formation webinar, and they will talk, I believe, Kathy, wave at me, you will talk extensively about pathways and playlists, right? So, but just in brief, we currently have, like in 3rd grade, you do this thing. Now we're looking at, okay, so if we have a, you know, a sort of a track or a path for families with younger children, and we have a path for families who want to dig deeper into the context of the Bible stories, which has sort of been what our 5th and 6th graders do, and maybe we have a path of creative prayer. There might be a number of paths that we can offer, but it gives people some choice in that. And then playlists, which will be covered next week, are the ways that we can organize and curate content for families to have access to those things. Another opportunity is that now we get to do ministry 24/7, which is really great because faith is 24/7. And the other piece that I would lift up is that we are shifting toward shorter modules. How many of us have experienced COVID brain and really can, you know, I can think about what I'm going to have for dinner tonight, but don't ask me what is for dinner next week. I won't be able to tell you. And I think many of our families are like that as well. So let's think about planning in shorter modules. Rather than planning for the year, we plan for a few weeks at a time or maybe a month. And then just practically speaking, we'll be shifting from large groups, which are not technically possible right now, into smaller groups. So those are some of the shifts. You know, wave or nod at me. Are these making some sense? Do these sound like shifts? You're sort of my first test run. The families in our ministry are just starting to hear about this. And thank you. All right, I'm getting some reactions. So yeah, we're all trying to stay on the right path. And it's helpful to have feedback from colleagues. So I'm glad you're here and sharing that with me. This is a little, I'm about to wrap up here, but this is a little diagram we did about our shifts that we shared with our children's ministry team. It'll be in the slides, you can look at it later, but trying to really think about the shifts we're making as opportunities, right? And so this is sort of our, a little piece of communication for fall for our leaders that we shared that highlights our shifts. And then last plug for next week's hybrid ministry webinar. So I really think about that teeter-totter bar as the online platform or platforms that connect our in-person and our online ministry. One of the things that we heard loud and clear from parents in the spring is that there were far too many apps and logins that different teachers had if they had multiple children. They were overwhelmed with the number of new tools that they had to use. So we heard that loud and clear, and we spent a lot of time this summer researching what would be the best way to allow parents to connect with one another online in a safe, private space, to allow them to access content for our Sunday school or church school curriculum, and to have some ability to do online courses if we are doing primarily online ministry. So we spent a lot of time researching that, and that is kind of the direction that we're heading for fall as we think about maybe gathering. Sometimes we need a place where parents can find one place where parents can find everything that they need to participate in children and family ministry. So, and I would guide you to the top link here, the Cult of Pedagogy. She's an educator, and she talks to teachers about what they need to be effective teachers online. You need a database or a list of your people. You need outgoing communication systems like email. You need incoming communication systems, and you need a place to organize your content. And that can be as simple as a Google Doc or as fancy as, you know, Google Classroom or, you know, something that schools might use. So these links will take you to some other resources. Vibrant Faith has a good guide with a lot of apps and things reviewed. But that is one piece that I think will be critical to helping us pivot smoothly in a COVID-19 world as we need to. So Kathy, is this a good time for questions?
Yeah, we actually haven't had too many questions pop up in the chat box, but we are going to have the slides available. So I will post them in the same place where you registered, so that you can find that again. And we do have a couple of questions. And Christine, I know that you've worked a little bit with online learning platforms. Do you have anything to offer about, as people are starting to think, what kind of platforms might we use? What are your experiences, and what would you recommend?
Sure. That's a big question, and it's very contextual. I have heard of one ministry that is going to use the same platform that their school district uses, which is Canvas. That's something I'm familiar with, but I think there's wisdom in that. If parents and children already know how to use it, then it's easier for them, because they know that both church and school stuff are online in the same place, and they know how to use it. I think the challenge of that is that when our faith formation ministry things begin to seem a little bit like school, that can be off-putting for some children. And it is also true that we are not school. We are, we are disciples who walk alongside one another and walk alongside and follow in the footsteps of Jesus, which is a little bit different than learning facts and knowledge and skills. So you balance that. I tried Google Classroom a few years ago, and I'm not quite sure if it's still available for everybody with a Gmail account, but it was one that I quickly decided was a little bit more robust than I would ever need, and also really hard to organize. So we went with an app that is a community learning platform. So it's not as robust as you would need for a school, but it does have some networking capabilities for parents. And we are not locked into that for the entire year. We are actually testing it with a small group of parents right now and asking them to give us their honest feedback. Is it as simple as we think it is? Would they use it before we roll it out to the entire ministry? So those are kind of some my quick tips, I guess. But I've also heard the Cult of Pedagogy link. She actually knows schools that have been very successful just having a running Google Doc with links to materials that parents can access. I mean, if you are a smaller church or low tech, need to be low tech, you can do a Google Doc. So that was a creative idea that I hadn't even thought of.
That's cool. Which app are you using? Are you using Mighty Networks?
We are using Mighty Networks, which is what Vibrant Faith Catalyst runs on. So that had the benefit for me of I had used it as a user, and but I did look at like a dozen similar apps, and that one rose to the top as being simplest to use.
Yep, and that's called Mighty Networks. I'll type it in the chat box for you. Okay, another question. Okay, Nisha had one insight that they have noticed is how parents are tapped out on teaching from home, and they're looking at ways to limit that burden by dropping resources and materials at the home so they don't have to search for them, so families have them at their fingertips. Do you have any other ideas on how to limit that burden on parents?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll be honest, we delivered third grade Bibles to homes, but because of the size we are, and because Illinois was under a very strict shelter in place, we did not do any delivery or pickup of objects throughout the spring. But I hear what you're saying about parents being tapped out. I would look into ways that you can equip parents to bring faith alongside things that they are already doing. So, do you have a sense of, are your families praying at meal times? Could you just encourage them to do that one thing? And so you don't have to learn anything, you don't have to prepare anything. You just send home a dinner prayer and say, when you're at the table, say this prayer for a week. Maybe that is all that parents have the bandwidth for right now. And I think for many of us, though, I'm not sure that all of our families are praying around meals. So if we could get families to do that one thing, that's actually not as small as it might initially seem.
Yeah, so true. Sometimes it's helping people to see how they can weave faith into their already daily lives and not adding something new. As a parent of school-age kids, trying to add one more thing is exhausting to me also, and this is what I do. So I thank you for that. Another question is around volunteers, which is something that we haven't really talked about too much as we're thinking about planning. But there is this sense of if we have, let's say that there's a church that wants to open age level Sunday school, how do we create space for a volunteer network when we don't know what attendance is going to look like? How do we give permission to volunteers to step aside without feeling guilty? Because sometimes we can have assumptions or expectations on our people who really aren't ready to be there yet. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. So I have served a variety of sizes of churches. I've served several churches where average worship attendance was 60. Where I am now is a different size. And so I currently have 70 volunteer teachers on my roster. And they were recruited in February and asked to teach on teams so that they would each teach once a month on a grade level team. So fall does not look like that. And so we are in the process of connecting back with each of those grade level teams. We have not yet done it because we want to have something a little more tangible for them to see. I think that we're going, if all continues to go well, we're looking at maybe a couple of sessions a month online and maybe one or two in person. And so once we confirm that up a little bit, we would like to have some town halls with our teachers, because that's kind of the size we are, present something tangible in terms of a plan. And then I would like to invite them to take a couple days and then respond if this is something that they would still like to do. What we are committed to is when we have in-person Sunday school, the children's ministry staff prepares the lessons and materials for all the teachers. So if we're asking people to teach online, we are prepared to do that equivalent online and are working on, maybe getting some college students to run some tech for us on Zoom or, whatever we need for fall so that they can say yes if they are able. So I think, everybody's context is a little different and size is a little different, but I think communication is important, and also having enough of a plan in place that they can envision what it might look like to say yes or no to what you're asking them to do.
Cool, thanks. We've got some questions about the nursery. This is one of those really tricky spots because those are the places where you can't put face masks on babies. You can't socially distance them. They don't understand that at all. And yet those might be the parents that are the most exhausted and looking for some place to get a little bit of a break. So we have this balance between safety and caring for parents and hospitality and safety. Do you have any thoughts or any suggestions on, because this is a hard thing. Churches are trying to balance this. We want to be able to reopen, but how can we do that safely?
Right. You're going to like my answer, Kathy. I think that naming the why for your nursery would be key to being able to answer that question. Do you have a nursery? You're waving at me. I love it. Do you have a nursery primarily to provide respite to busy parents who are exhausted? Or do you have nursery care because children aren't welcome are not encouraged in the sanctuary, let's say, right? So how you respond to that is if it's because children have traditionally not been in the sanctuary or not encouraged to be there, maybe the shift you need to make is more toward family worship. But if your why is parents are tired, then I don't know that I have a solution off the top of my head, but how can you care for those parents? What can you do to provide them some sort of respite while keeping everybody safe and within the guidelines? Yeah, there's not an easy answer, but I would say really name what is important about your nursery in the fall and let that guide your decision making.
Right. And I would also add, because I know that we're coming from a lot of different places, to know what your state and local guidelines look like, and be really conscientious of, even though children may not get as sick or may not be sick at all from COVID, we don't know the long-term impacts, and we don't know how that spread could happen. So just being acknowledge those pieces and being aware of all those things, I think that's important. And we've talked a lot about kids, but I know that there are some who are serving with older adults who may not have access to technology, like many of the families that we're talking about may. I wonder if you have any thoughts about how to do some online, or not online, but do some not in-person ministry, hybrid ministry, where you have maybe in-person, but maybe you have some other creative ways that you can do not in-person ministry with those who don't have the technology.
Right. So this is not my area of expertise, but I do have a few colleagues who have had some success with, every Zoom call also has a phone number. So I think it's fair to say that all of our people probably can, dial the phone and then at least have the audio for Zoom calls. So that might be one way to do that. Or maybe there's a simple conference calling app. People have been mailing home, I know, sermons and all of those things. I think any mail that we can do is really important right now. People are enjoying getting that sort of personal touch, and I think people are opening mail even more than email these days. So yeah, it's really low tech, but sort of that persistent and intentional paying attention to who are you not reaching, and then paying attention to what they need in order to be able to connect with the church.
Yeah, thanks. And even having some pen pal kind of things so that we're connecting generationally. Thinking about, I'm a big advocate of playlists, and so creating playlists that can be sent home of things that people can do on their own during the week, and then maybe having a phone call conversation with a couple of people to talk about what have we done. I think all of those kinds of things can be really helpful. So there's a question, and this is a great turning point. I think we've hit on most of the main questions. I know a lot of you also sent questions in when you registered, and if we haven't answered your question today, a lot of them are going to be answered in part 2. But one of the things that was in the chat box, and I'm just going to read it because it's really good. As I'm thinking about all this and what you said about the study that determined grade level instruction-based ministry isn't the most effective, it seems like this may be an opportunity to shift the whole mindset and change to family-based intergenerational ministry rather than children's ministry. I wonder how to start the discussion about making that change. And that is very much part of what next week is about. Part 2, Christy White and I had some really great conversation in the last couple of weeks about what does this look like and how can we make this work. So I encourage you to come back next week. Super great plug. And if you're not available next week, we will be recording that webinar also so that you can watch it on your own time. And we are at our hour mark. When I'm doing Zooms with my folks in Michigan, I say about 45 minutes. You guys are all tapped out. And so I think that this is probably a good time for us to break for this time. I will send out the slides that Christine has offered. Apparently my emails have sometimes gone to junk boxes, so please check your junk box if it's not in your inbox within the next little bit, and we'll get that out to you. And also I'll include some websites and other things that may be helpful that we have referred to in our webinar today. I would like to thank you all for coming and participating. I'd like to thank Christine for coming and presenting. This wasn't exactly what we had intended when we talked months ago, but I find this really helpful, and I hope that you all have found it helpful also. Feel free to reach out to me or Christy White if you have any questions, and we are happy to help you, whether you're in Michigan or not. We're happy to help you. We know that this is a challenging time, and we want to be able to encourage and support as many people as possible as we're on this journey together. I'm going to read this. Is it okay if I read this, or do you want to read this, Christine?
I will let you read it, and I just want to end with a blessing that may all that you are planning be built on the firm foundation, and may God's grace and peace go with you. And yes, Kathy, please share.
The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on rock. Matthew 7:25. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and go in peace.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kathy. It was so great to be here.
Christine.